Do well to let me know the city you are watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to see more intriguing stories. It happened in a flash. 1 second, Lucas was crossing the street with his cart of scraps and dreams. The next. Screech. Thud. The black Bentley slammed to a halt, its grille dented. Lucas's body hit the hood with a sickening thump, then crumpled to the asphalt. Horns blared. Gasps echoed from passers-by. And the driver, he just sat there, frozen behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. People rushed over. A woman screamed, "Call 911. Someone else shouted, "Is he breathing?" And inside the car, the billionaire didn't move. He stared out, horror on his face. But here's the twist no one expected. When Lucas finally opened his eyes, barely able to lift his head, he whispered something that would change everything. "I know you," he rasped, blood running down the side of his face. "You're the man who ruined my life." 2 years earlier. Lucas Miller wasn't always sleeping under bridges and eating from trash cans. Once, he was a bright-eyed college student at Boston State University. He studied architecture, always sketching buildings that looked like dreams carved into the sky. He had a full scholarship, a part-time job at a diner, and a heart that believed in hard work. But things changed fast. First, his mom got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that eats away everything: body, money, and time. He begged for help. He called relatives. Applied for emergency aid. Nothing came in time. When his mother died, something in Lucas cracked. He couldn't keep up with rent. The scholarship didn't cover off-campus housing anymore. His job fired him for missing too many shifts while attending to his mom's final days. Within 3 months, Lucas was on the streets. At night, he curled under a freeway overpass with a sleeping bag someone had tossed out. During the day, he roamed the city, collecting cans and metal to sell for coins. He talked to almost no one, except for Maria, an old woman who ran a soup kitchen in Roxbury and gave him extra bread when no one was looking. And even when life turned dark, Lucas clung to something most homeless people lost quickly: his mind. He still sketched. On the backs of cardboard. On the corners of newspapers. On napkins from fast food joints. He still believed that maybe, someday, someone would notice him. But every time he looked up at the tall glass buildings downtown, something inside him twisted. One in particular, the towering headquarters of Sterling & Cole, the largest investment firm on the East Coast. Why? Because that building, shining like a promise, was connected to the man who, according to Lucas, ruined everything. Meanwhile, across town, Brandon Sterling was having a bad morning. His private chef overcooked the eggs. The board was pushing back on his latest acquisition. And now his assistant was calling repeatedly about a last-minute gala invitation he didn't care about. Brandon was one of those billionaires who never smiled unless it helped a deal. He was tall, icy, and always dressed like he just stepped out of a GQ cover. But underneath the tailored suits and expensive watches, there was something hollow. He never paid attention to the streets below. People like Lucas didn't exist in his world. Not until that morning. Brandon had been texting while driving. Not looking. Not thinking. Then came the screech. The thud. And then the moment their lives collided, literally. And now Lucas lay on the stretcher. Paramedics hovered around him, strapping him in. But his eyes never left Brandon. "You know me," Lucas muttered again, weaker now. Back then, the housing deal, the college project. Brandon's face twitched. He took one slow step forward. "Who are you?" But Lucas didn't answer. His head lolled to the side, and the ambulance doors slammed shut. The crowd parted. Police asked questions. Brandon gave his license, distracted, still hearing the man's words. What was he talking about? What deal? He didn't remember. But something about that face, those eyes. The car that hit him. The man behind the wheel. The name Lucas whispered with his last ounce of strength. Brandon Sterling. That night, Brandon Sterling sat in his penthouse. He poured himself a drink with shaking hands. And just as he was about to sit down, his phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered. A voice, cold, calm, and unfamiliar, said only 3 words before the line went dead. "He's still alive." Brandon froze. And for the first time in years, he was afraid. Brandon Sterling stood motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the call ended. The voice had been male. Unfamiliar. But the message was clear. He's still alive. The glass of whiskey in Brandon's hand trembled before slipping from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor of his penthouse. Liquid spread across the tiles like a silent alarm. For a man who controlled half the city's real estate and sat on billion-dollar boards, it was rare to see fear on his face. But tonight, Brandon was rattled. Across town, Boston General Hospital. Lucas Miller lay unconscious in the ICU. Tubes in his nose. Bandages across his chest. Monitors beeped steadily beside his bed. The nurse on duty scribbled notes quietly, unaware of the storm about to come. Outside the room, Maria, Lucas's only real friend from the streets, sat on a hard bench, holding a crumpled sketchpad. His sketchpad. Pages inside were filled with buildings. Futuristic ones. Bridges. Parks. A few looked familiar, like the Sterling and Cole headquarters downtown. She flipped through until she found the last page he drew, a rough image of Brandon Sterling's face. Underneath, Lucas had written one shaky sentence. "He built a kingdom off my mother's grave." 5 years ago. Lucas had grown up in a modest Boston neighborhood. When he got accepted into university, his mother, Teresa, was overjoyed. But she soon learned the house they rented, along with dozens of others, was part of a redevelopment project. The landlord had sold the properties to a holding company. Families were evicted overnight. The deal had been signed by a young, rising investor, Brandon Sterling. What Lucas never knew until he saw the press release later was that the redevelopment project came with a twist. It doubled the rent for incoming tenants and displaced most of the old ones. Teresa had begged to stay. She even mailed letters to Sterling and Cole's office. None were answered. They were kicked out 2 months before her diagnosis. Lucas tried to fight. But he was just a student. Powerless. And when his mom passed, all he had left was bitterness and her eviction notice. And now inside Sterling and Cole headquarters, Brandon couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, well past midnight. Behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston's skyline glittered, cold and indifferent. He opened his computer and typed in Lucas Miller. Nothing. No criminal record. No social media. Just a couple of mentions from a college architecture contest 5 years ago. Brandon frowned. This was strange. Most people had a trail. But this guy. It was like Lucas had been erased, until now. He leaned back, confused, and for the first time in years, haunted by guilt. But then his screen blinked. A message appeared. No sender. Just 3 words. You owe him. Brandon jumped up. What the hell? Another message popped up instantly. You don't remember, but we do. Meanwhile, in the hospital. Lucas stirred. His fingers twitched. Maria sat up immediately. Lucas. He didn't open his eyes, but his lips moved. Did he come? He whispered. Who, Lucas? She asked. The man, the car. Maria clenched his hand. No. Not yet. Lucas's breathing turned shaky. I need to tell the truth, before they silence me like they did her. Maria's face turned pale. Who, Lucas? But he drifted back into sleep. The next day Brandon made a decision. He called his assistant. Find out what hospital the man I hit was taken to. I want to visit him. His assistant hesitated. Sir, The legal team says it's better to stay away. It could be viewed as an admission of guilt. I don't care, Brandon snapped. Get the car. Lucas woke again just as Brandon Sterling entered the ICU. The nurses froze. One even gasped. That's him. Brandon walked in slowly. He looked at Lucas, who was now fully awake, eyes sharp, voice dry. You remember now? Lucas asked. Brandon hesitated. I don't know what you mean. Lucas gave a bitter smile. Then let me remind you. He reached under his pillow and pulled out a single folded document. A worn eviction notice with Teresa Miller's name on it. Brandon took it. His fingers shook as he read it. Lucas said just 5 words that cut through the air like a knife. This was your signature. Before Brandon could answer. Boom. The hospital lights flickered. An explosion echoed from the parking garage. Security shouted. Alarms blared. And down the hallway, a dark figure stepped inside the hospital, carrying something beneath their coat. Lucas's heart raced. His voice cracked. He found me. Brandon turned, confused. Who? But Lucas's eyes were wide with fear. And Maria whispered. Run. Chaos broke loose inside Boston General. Nurses screamed. Alarms blared. Security scrambled toward the stairwell. Brandon stood frozen at the foot of Lucas's bed as the hospital lights dimmed and flickered. Lucas's pale face twisted in panic. It's him, he rasped. He followed me here. Brandon turned sharply. Who? What are you talking about? But before Lucas could answer, Maria grabbed Brandon's wrist with surprising strength. You need to go, she hissed. You don't know what you've stepped into. Then came the footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Echoing closer. A tall man in a black coat entered the hallway. Hood up. His hands in his pockets. The nurses ducked. One security officer raised a baton, but the man didn't stop. He moved like he wasn't afraid of anything, or anyone. Maria pushed a rolling tray in front of the door and stood between the stranger and Lucas. Turn around, she shouted, her voice shaking. The man paused. Then slowly lifted his head. And Brandon's stomach dropped. He knew that face. Not from business. Not from parties. From an old photo. A company file. A security report he'd once ignored. 3 years ago, Brandon had received a warning from his team about a rogue employee, an architect in turn named Vincent Reyes. Brilliant. Obsessive. But unstable. Vincent had once worked with a small community housing nonprofit before getting laid off after a sterling and coal acquisition. He had filed reports accusing Brandon's firm of demolishing public housing illegally. Said it drove people onto the streets. The file was buried. Brandon never read the rest. Until now. Vincent's eyes locked on Lucas. You shouldn't have survived, he said coldly. Brandon stepped forward, voice firm. You need to leave. Vincent smirked. Funny. Coming from the man who signed the papers that started this whole thing. Lucas tried to sit up. You set the fire, he whispered. You were the one who chased me off the bridge. Brandon turned sharply. What? Maria gasped. Vincent didn't deny it. I warned him not to talk. He wouldn't listen. Now he wants to tell you? No, sir. Not today. He pulled something from under his coat. A switchblade. Maria screamed. Brandon lunged without thinking. He tackled Vincent against the doorframe. The knife clattered to the floor. A nurse hit the emergency button. Lucas groaned in pain as the commotion surged. Security charged in seconds later. Vincent tried to run but was pinned to the floor. He thrashed and shouted, "He's lying. They're all part of it." Brandon's hands were shaking. His suit was torn. For the first time in years, he looked human. The police arrived and hauled Vincent away. But something about the man's eyes haunted Brandon. They weren't just filled with rage, they were filled with truth. Later that evening, everything was quiet again. Lucas was sedated. Maria sat outside, silently praying. And Brandon paced the hallway like a man haunted by ghosts. He called his assistant. Pull up every file from 5 years ago. Every land deal, every eviction. His assistant hesitated. Sir, those records are sealed. Why? Unseal them, Brandon snapped. And check who approved the Southside housing clearance in 2020. A pause. Sir, that was you. Brandon closed his eyes. He didn't need the records. He remembered now. Teresa Miller's eviction. The ignored letter from a sick woman. The community protests. Vincent's unfiled complaints. It all came rushing back. He had signed off on it all. He had ruined Lucas's life. Meanwhile, dark room, unknown location. Vincent sat handcuffed to a bench. But he wasn't alone. A man in a suit stepped into the room and placed a briefcase in front of him. You said you had proof, the man said. Vincent nodded slowly. It's all there. Documents, files, even the recording from last night. The man smirked. And handed him a phone. Let's make a deal. Back in the hospital, Lucas woke again. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on Brandon. I'm not done, he whispered. Brandon leaned closer. What do you mean? Lucas's voice was weak but clear. You think Vincent was the problem? He coughed. He was just the messenger. Brandon's heart pounded. Lucas's next words chilled him to the bone. The real enemy is in your boardroom. Brandon Sterling stared at Lucas, the words echoing in his head like a warning shot. The real enemy is in your boardroom. For a moment, everything went quiet, too quiet. Then Lucas's monitors beeped faster. Nurses rushed in. Brandon was pushed aside. But his mind was already spinning. His boardroom? That meant someone close. Someone powerful. Someone who knew everything, and didn't want the truth out. The next morning at Sterling and Cole headquarters, Brandon walked into the boardroom with a steel expression. The partners were already seated, 8 men and women in suits worth more than most homes. They greeted him politely, but something in their smiles felt off. He sat at the head of the table. I want to reopen the 2020 Southside project files, he announced. Whispers erupted. Mr. Lang, the oldest partner, cleared his throat. That project was closed legally and thoroughly. Brandon's eyes narrowed. Was it? He watched their faces carefully. Ms. Delaney, VP of Acquisitions, didn't flinch. But Thomas Brax, COO, blinked. Just once. Then he looked down. Brandon caught it. He had his suspect. 2 weeks before the accident in a hidden meeting room, Thomas Brax reviewed documents with Vincent Reyes. You said if I delivered the reports, you'd bury this, Vincent snapped. Thomas smiled coldly. Plans changed. You shouldn't have warned the boy. Vincent stood up. I'm not part of this anymore. Thomas stepped in close. You already are. He handed Vincent a burner phone. Don't worry. If anyone finds out about the Miller case, they won't live long enough to tell the story. While at the Boston General Hospital, Maria gently wiped Lucas's forehead. You were right about him, she whispered. Lucas managed a weak smile. But there's more, he said. There's something hidden in the Southside contracts. Something illegal. And Brandon, he wasn't the only one signing. Meanwhile at the office, Brandon opened a private safe and pulled out an old USB drive labeled Internal Audit, 2020. He plugged it in. A spreadsheet loaded. Names, signatures, payout logs, bribes, evictions, hidden shell companies. And at the top, authorized by Brandon. That night, Brandon confronted Thomas in the underground parking lot. You used my name, he said quietly. Thomas didn't deny it. You were too busy building towers to notice what was happening underneath. Brandon stepped closer. You destroyed lives. Thomas grinned. And made us billions. Brandon's fists clenched. Lucas survived. His talking. Thomas's smile faded. Then he pulled something from his coat, a flash drive. You're not going public with this, Thomas warned. You do, and I drag your name down with me. Brandon stared at him, then said softly. Not if I get to the truth first. Back at the hospital, Maria helped Lucas sit up. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. Lucas nodded. It's time. He handed her a USB drive. Give this to the press. Everything they did, it's all on here. But as she turned to leave, the lights flickered again. And a dark shadow stood at the end of the hall. Someone had come to stop her. Maria froze. At the end of the hospital hallway, the dark figure stepped forward, slow, calm, and chilling. He wore a black suit, no name tag. No expression. But in his hand was a silenced pistol. She turned, eyes wide. Lucas's eyes met hers, both understanding at once. They sent a cleaner. Maria clutched the USB drive tighter and bolted. The man advanced. Lucas hit the emergency button beside his bed, alert. Code red lit up in the hallway. Nurses screamed. Alarms blared. Maria pushed through staff and patients, hiding the drive deep in her coat. She dashed into a stairwell. Her heart pounded. She'd seen men like that before, no badge, no conscience. Just a target. Meanwhile, Sterling and Cole headquarters. Brandon stood before the board, his voice firm. I have documents proving our COO, Thomas Brax, forged my signature, authorized illegal evictions, and worked with criminal enforcers to silence victims, including the man I hit. Gasps. Shouts. Confusion erupted. Thomas stood, pretending to laugh. Brandon, you've finally lost it. Security, Brandon said, cutting him off. 2 armed officers entered. They weren't company security, they were federal agents. Thomas's smile cracked. Brandon threw a folder on the table. He was also under investigation for racketeering. I contacted the FBI last night. Agents cuffed Thomas as he lunged. You fool. You'll go down too. They'll never let you walk away clean. Brandon didn't blink. Maybe not. But I'm not hiding anymore. Back at the hospital. The man in the suit stormed into the stairwell, too late. Maria was gone. Outside, she hopped into a cab and handed the flash drive to the driver. Take this to Channel 9 News. If you don't see me again, just get it there. 3 hours later, breaking news. Asterisk, we interrupt this program with breaking news. A whistleblower report has exposed illegal real estate practices tied to Sterling and Cole, including forced evictions, bribery, and connections to violent attacks against the homeless. Billionaire Brandon Sterling, in a shocking move, turned over damning evidence to the FBI, including records implicating his own firm's COO, asterisk. Brandon visited Lucas at the hospital. Lucas was sitting up now, stronger. Still bruised, but alert. You really did it? Lucas asked. Brandon nodded. I did what I should have done years ago. Lucas stared at him for a long moment. You can't fix the past, he said. But, maybe you can stop it from repeating. Brandon sat beside him. I'm shutting the firm down. Starting something new, transparent, ethical. If you're ever strong enough. I could use an architect. Lucas blinked. And for the first time in years, he smiled. 1 year later, a new building rose in Southside Boston. Clean. Modern. Beautiful. A shelter and vocational training center called the Horizon Project. At the front gates, cameras flashed. Lucas, wearing a navy suit and walking without pain, stood proudly beside the ribbon. Next to him, Brandon Sterling, dressed down, no security. Maria held the giant scissors, tears in her eyes. They cut the ribbon together. Behind them, a bold sign read, "Built on truth. Powered by second chances." As the crowd cheered, a black car sat across the street. Tinted windows. Engine off. Inside, a phone buzzed. A voice whispered, "The Horizon project is live." But he's not the only one who knows the truth. The screen went black.